From Oklahoma.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that at the conclusion of the remarks to the presentation by the junior senator from Oklahoma, that I be recognized as if in morning business.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, thank you. I ask that unanimous consent that the pending amendment be set aside, and I call up amendment number 43. Let's see what I did with it. 436.
Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, proposes an amendment numbered 436.
I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, as a matter of right, I ask that my amendment be modified with the changes that I now send to the desk. Further, I make the point that I retain my right to the floor if the modification is made under the precedent of the Senate.
The senator has the right to modify the amendment.
Madam President, I now send a cloture motion to the desk on the pending amendment.
Clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close debate on the pending amendment number 436 as modified to S782, signed by 17 senators as follows: Coburn, DeMint, McCain, Burr, Vitter, Ensign, Ayotte,
I don't know. Reading of the names be waived.
I object.
Objection is heard.
Continue to read. Hey, Laura.
Enzi, Risch, Inhofe,
Is he signed twice?
Risch, Inhofe, Corker, Enzi, Isaacson, Barrasso, Alexander, Cornyn, Sessions, Brown of Massachusetts.
Madam President,
Senator from Oklahoma has the floor.
I'd ask my colleague, my senior senator from Oklahoma, who I don't think is on the floor right now, to allow time for Senator Brown to bring up an amendment, and I would yield to him at this time.
Madam President.
Senator from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. Thank the gentleman who spoke before me. I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendments be set aside in order to call up amendment number 405.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will report.
Senator from Massachusetts, Mr. Brown, proposes an amendment numbered 405. At the end, add the following. In general, the amendment
Madam President.
made by...
Madam President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you. I ask consent to dispense with further reading of the amendment.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Thank you. I just wanted to discuss a minute the modification to my amendment. Corn prices today are at their highest level since 1974. Corn supply is at its lowest level since 1974. We have tremendous problems with food inflation in this country, and what we put forward this afternoon was a modification to the blending tax credit as well as the import tax fee on ethanol, and we'll look forward to that debate as we come forward. The federal government now spends $6 billion a year paying over 40 cents a gallon to have ethanol blended, which is already mandated by law that they have to blend it anyway. So this, in essence, will save $3 billion this year for the federal government. Number two is it will take significant pressure off of corn prices, which will lower food prices both here and abroad. And with that, I yield to the senator from Oklahoma who has speaking in morning business.
Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Are we in a quorum call?
No.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment for the consideration of the following 3, 429, 430, and 438.
Madam President, I reserve the right to object.
Can you just ask him to tell him that you need to consult with the chairwoman if he could just hold off on for 1 minute?
Senator, if you can hold off for just a moment, we'd like to consult with the chairwoman.
All right. And while I am holding off, it's my understanding that some of the rest of them are getting in the queue, and I'm just trying to get these three in. The same treatment has been afforded those before me.
Why don't we explain that? I'll talk.
President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, I want to amend my previous request and ask unanimous consent to set the pending amendment aside for the consideration of two of the amendments, number 430 and 438.
Is there objection? Without objection, clerk will report.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Inhofe, proposes an amendment numbered 430.
Ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Without objection.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Inhofe, proposes an amendment numbered 438.
Ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Without objection.
And Madam President, I had asked by unanimous consent that I be considered to speak as if in morning business, which I know that you will honor. However, I want to mention this, one of these two amendments I think is very significant, and it's somewhat similar, I think, to the amendment offered by the senior senator from Maine. And what it has to do is with these various regulations that are actually coming. Most of these are coming from the Environmental Protection Agency. You know, you might want to get a chart set up for down there, and I'll go down there and do it. One of the serious problems that we have is in the committee that we have, on which I am the ranking member, the Environment and Public Works Committee, that is chaired by Senator Boxer from California. We have oversight over the Environmental Protection Agency. We've been watching what's been happening in the last several months. Many of the things that they have been trying to get through regulations here on the floor of the Senate, they've been unable to do, through legislation. And so they're trying to do the very things that they're unable to get done through legislation by regulation. And these are very, very expensive. Right now we have a problem with our economy. We have an overregulation that is just killing a lot of the businesses that are out there. And what I'm trying to do as an amendment, and that's what the amendment number 438 is to get into the record. The bill sets up a committee to assess the effects of the EPA's regulatory mandates, including the key provisions of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Solid Waste Disposal Act, and this would include greenhouse gas regulations, boiler MAC, utility MAC, ozone, particulate matter standards, coal ash disposal, and water discharge requirements. Now, the assessment includes the evaluation of the cumulative effects of the EPA's mandates on employment, economic development, and this type of thing. It doesn't otherwise modify or affect the statute. Now, the reason I want to have this in here is we have now quantified what it's costing the American people in terms of employment, in terms of dollars, and in just greenhouse gas, for example. We know that the cost, if they do anything like the cap and trade that they have tried to do through legislation, and that's exactly what they're attempting to do right now through regulations of the EPA, somewhere between $300 and $400 billion of loss in GDP per year. That's every year. You know, I call that, you can call that a tax increase if you want to, because that's exactly what it is, the same as a loss in GDP. In my case, in Oklahoma, because it's confusing. When we, in this administration, have been talking about hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars, nobody really has a handle on what it costs. In my state of Oklahoma, I keep a running track as to how many families file tax returns. In my state of Oklahoma, if you take the number of families that file tax returns and divide it in, do the math, that would be somewhere around a little over $3,000 per family if we were to pass a cap and trade regulations. Now, what is wrong with this? A lot of people are out there saying, Inhofe, you've been wrong all this time. And since you're wrong on you may be wrong, or what if you're wrong? My response is this. We have a very fine director of the Environmental Protection Agency, Lisa Jackson. I can remember talking to her about, you know, what would happen if we were to pass any of these bills where we're going back to maybe the Warner-Lieberman bill or the Waxman-Markey bill, or even by regulations, cap and trade. The cost would be excessive. However, my question to her was, if we were successful in doing this, would this reduce the greenhouse gases? And the answer was no. And the reason it wouldn't is because it only applies to the United States of America. So if we're going to pass a tax increase on every tax-paying family in my state of Oklahoma of $3,000 a year, and they admit they're not going to get anything for it, then we need to stop from doing that. I could do the same thing about the ozone, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. That'd be $676.8 billion loss in GDP by 2020. The Boiler MAC rules and regulations, some $1 billion loss in GDP. Utility MAC, $184 billion in compliance costs. That's just between the years of 2011 and 2030. And the cement max, some $3.5 billion. Now, I'm saying this because we need to have our eyes open. Tell the American people what the cost is of all these things, and in doing this, this will be done by this amendment, Senate Amendment number 438, and we will be, hopefully, we'll be able to get a vote on that. Now, Madam President, I'm going to take a little time on something else that has to be said today. And that is what I've been on the floor 6 times already talking about. And the only reason I'm continuing to do this is because somehow the State Department, the French, the United Nations, and all of them seem to be laboring under this misconception that I'll go away and I won't talk about it anymore. I'm not going to go away. I'm going to keep talking about it. And the problem that we have right now is started some time ago, and I will just share with you some of the new development today. And we're talking about the rigged election that took place in Cote d'Ivoire, and the fact that someone whose name is Alassane Ouattara, we have demonstrated very clearly, won the election by fraudulent means. The president of that country is Laurent Gbagbo. He's been president now for a number of years. His wife, Simone Gbagbo, has been a gracious and a great first lady. Now, what I want to do today, and this is the 7th time I've been on the floor talking about this, is give you the latest of this grave situation in Cote d'Ivoire. And I can only say that it continues to be a targeted genocide against supporters and perceived supporters of the deposed president, Laurent Gbagbo. Now, this will be, as I said, my 7th time speaking on this on the floor, and the last time we talked about on April 4th, when we first started talking about this, we were hoping that we'd be able to stop the State Department and others from going along with what's going on now in Cote d'Ivoire. I know it's complicated. A lot of people don't remember the genocide in Rwanda of 1994, and now we look back and say, oh, what a horrible thing that was. Sure, it was horrible. But right now, what's going on in the streets of Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire is something that has got to be surfaced in front of the American people. I have new information that proves that what I've been saying for the last 7 weeks, that the rebel leader, Alassane Ouattara, is still carrying on death squads, killing people in the streets of Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. There they are, Madam President. That's the death squad. These are the people that are murdering today as we speak and torturing people in Abidjan. I bet there are a handful of people who even know where Abidjan is. But this is the city, the capital of Cote d'Ivoire, a beautiful country. And these people coming in from the north under this Alassane Ouattara are in there today. I don't know how many hundreds of people they're murdering just today, but they're doing it, and they're torturing, and they're raping. And there's, but before I tell you what the most recent information that came out from the Human Rights Watch, I'm going to remind you of what I said back on the 27th of May, and that was when Amnesty International, they reported that a manhunt, and I'm quoting now from Amnesty International, what I said right here from this podium, that a, quote, a manhunt was launched against Gbagbo loyalists in Abidjan, and several senior officials close to him were beaten in the hours after his arrest. That was 2 weeks ago. And I'm further quoting now from the Amnesty International. In the west of the country, thousands of people fled their homes, and many are still living in the forest, too frightened to return. Now look at this. This is the burned, charred bodies of people who have been tortured to death. This just happened. It's going on today, right now. There's a man who's just severely beaten. He died right after that. a small child who was put to death the same way. Here they are in the middle of the executions. That's going on right now. And then Gaten Mutu, who's Amnesty International's West Africa researcher, said, quote, human rights violations are still being committed against real and perceived supporters of Laurent Gbagbo. Alassane Ouattara's failure to condemn these acts could be seen as a green light by many of his security forces and other armed elements fighting with them to continue. Ouattara must publicly state that all violence against civilian population must. All right, that's what the mandate was 2 weeks ago. That's what they're supposed to do 2 weeks ago. They went on to say, in the Amnesty International, attacks against villages inhabited by people belonging to ethnic groups considered supporters of Gbagbo, the legitimate president, continued in the first weeks of May, according to Amnesty International. Between 6 and 8 May, several villages were burned and dozens killed. Ouattara's Republican forces justified these acts by saying they were looking for arms and Liberian mercenaries. And they went on to describe this. There's an article in Guardian magazine that talked about this. This, again, was a little over 2 weeks ago. They said, quote, an Amnesty delegation spent 2 months in Ivory Coast, that's Cote d'Ivoire, gathering more than 100 witnesses' statements from people who survived the massacre in Dukwai. Now, that's what this actually is in that small town of Dukwai. The neighboring villages on March 29th. All statements, still quoting from them, all the statements indicated a systematic and targeted series of killings committed by the uniformed Republican forces loyal to Ouattara, who executed hundreds of men on political and ethnic grounds. And before killing them, he would ask their victims to give their names, show identity cards, and some of these cards were found beside the bodies. A woman who lived in Dukwai told researchers, quote, they came into the yards and chased the women. Then they told the men to line up and ask them to state their first and second names and show their identity cards. They then executed them. I was present, quoting a woman who was watching her husband, while they sorted the men out. 3 young men, one of who was about 15, were shot to death in front of me. And this Amnesty's report also accuses the UN mission, which has a base less than a mile from Dukwai, of what they called fatal inertia. Fatal inertia, that means they did nothing. They let this go on. We're talking about the United Nations. You know, people around here, there are a lot of liberals in this body who don't think that anything worthwhile is worthwhile unless it comes from some big body like the United Nations, and that's what's happening right now. So I want to go ahead. I know that there's someone else on the floor that wants to speak, but I just want to be sure that we are informed that what was going on then, what I talked about 2 weeks ago, is still happening today. Now, what happened today is the newly released report by Human Rights Watch. This is a different group now from Amnesty International, which states, and I'm going to quote now, this came out today, armed forces loyal to President Alassane Ouattara have killed at least 149 real or perceived supporters of the former president, Laurent Gbagbo, since taking control of the commercial capital of Abidjan in mid-April of 2011. The report goes on to describe the gruesome detail, barbaric episodes of the torture and the deaths at the hands of the Ouattara forces. And this is happening today, right now. And here are a few examples today. Ouattara's forces, I'm reading now, this is from the Human Rights Watch. Ouattara's forces sealed off and searched areas formerly controlled by pro-Gbagbo militia, and the majority of the documented abuses occurred in the long-time pro-Gbagbo stronghold of Yopongnon. That's the town in that stronghold in the south part of the, you got to keep in mind the Ouattara's forces came from the Muslim area up north. Most killings were point-blank executions of youth. You're seeing a point-blank. That's what it looks like, Madam President, right there, the gun to the head. Most killings were point-blank executions of youth from ethnic groups generally aligned with Gbagbo in what appeared to be collective punishment for these groups' participation in Gbagbo's militia. One man described how Republican soldiers killed his 21-year-old brother. 2 of them grabbed his legs. Another one held his arms behind him. A 5th one held his head. Then a guy pulled out a knife and slit my brother's throat. He was screaming. I saw his legs shaking after they slit his throat, the blood streaming down as they were doing it. They said they had to eliminate all of the young patrons that they had caused. Now leave this. Yeah. All right. During the raid in Abidjan, the forces, the UN forces, the French, and OATRA, they went in, and it happens that the seated president, President Gbagbo, he had not a lot of armaments, but he had a whole lot of young people, and they were armed not with weapons, but with baseball bats, with wooden clubs, and they surrounded the palace to try to protect him, knowing that they would kill their president. And this is where they are today. These are the young kids. This is in a gas station up here. They're all lined up there. They're executing some of them, starving, beating the rest of them. But look at there's the pictures, what is going on. These young patriots were young supporters of President Gbagbo who surrounded his palace in a human chain, armed with just sticks and bats, against the UN and French attack helicopters, which were bombing Gbagbo's residence, now being searched out by OATRA's forces for torture and death. The report goes on. This report came out today. Quote, another woman who witnessed the killing of 18 youths was brutally raped by the Republican force soldiers after being forced to load their vehicles with pillaged goods. On May 23rd, an elderly man in the same neighborhood as saw Republican forces execute his son, whom they accused of being a member of the pro-Gbagbo militia. Another witness described seeing the Republican forces slit the throats of the youth in front of his father after finding an AK-47 and a grenade in his bedroom during a 4 a.m. house-to-house search. The witness was stripped and forced to hand over his laptop computer, cell phones, money, and was murdered. Human Rights Watch documented similar pillages of sources in scores of houses in Abidjan. The witness, by the way, Madam President, I personally talked to these people in Abidjan who witnessed this going on. The witness, like many others interviewed by Human Rights Watch, waited to flee Abidjan to his family village, but had no money for transportation since the Republican forces had taken everything. Human Rights Watch said it documented 54 extrajudicial executions at detention sites, including police stations and the oil, and that was the station that we just now showed right here. Those are the executions of the young kids are taking place. In addition to the killings that I'm reading now from the Human Rights Watch, the Human Rights interviewed a young man who had been detained by the Republican forces and arrested for no other apparent reason than their age and ethnic groups. Nearly every former detainee described being struck repeatedly with guns, belts, ropes, and fists for allegedly participation in the young patriots. Those are the young people surrounding the palace. Several described torture, including forcible removal of teeth from one victim and placed a burning hot knife in another victim's and then cutting him. Mr. President, the Human Rights report that witnesses consistently identified the killers and abusers as the Republican forces of OATRA, and they were overseen by the OATRA and the Soros. Now, Soros is the general of OATRA. He's the one who was responsible in going into Dikwe. There's Dikwe. That's where they murdered all the people, and this Soros they speak of is the one who was responsible for that under the supervision and direction of Alassane Ouattara. So the Human Rights report calls on Ouattara to immediately ensure the humane treatment of anyone obtained by the forces. This is something I've been demanding for 7 weeks. I hope now that this report is going to draw the attention so that at least the State Department knows what's going on. They've had an opportunity to voice themselves and to come up with a solution. The solution is to offer amnesty or to send him to a country where he would be able to live. Now, I've been very critical of the State Department in the handling of this situation in Cote d'Ivoire. From the beginning, I sent them evidence months ago that showed that Ouattara had engaged in massive election fraud during the last year's presidential election. I called for an investigation. I called for a new election. Of course, it all met on deaf ears. I also called upon the State Department to inquire as to the health and safety of President Laurent Gbagbo and his wife Simone. To date, we have nothing. So, lastly, I urged our State Department to use its power to influence and to allow the reconciliation process in Côte d'Ivoire to begin by allowing Gbagbo to go into exile. And I pointed out that at least half of the population of Côte d'Ivoire, they support Gbagbo. And I have knowledge of one African leader who is willing to accept Gbagbo's right now in his country. It's a sub-Sahara African country. The State Department has been aware of this for over a month. And again, I strongly suggest that that is the solution to the problem. It's been done before. It was done in Haiti with Baby Doc Duvalier and was sent into exile into France. So lastly, I just want to say, I know people are anxious to talk and they're tired of hearing me talk about Côte d'Ivoire, but I had a very pleasant experience yesterday. I met the nominee for the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. His name is Bill Burns, and I had a chance to visit with him about this and other problems that we're having now. I found him to be very receptive. I'm convinced that he embodies the high traditions of the Foreign Service, selfless, nonpartisan diplomatic service. And he indicated to me that he will follow through with my previous request with the State Department, and specifically regarding the health and well-being of the Gbagbos. And lastly, I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with him. So I'm going to finish by letting you see the two Gbagbos. This is the president, I believe that still should be the legitimate president of Côte d'Ivoire. The election was stolen from him. That was the happy guy that I knew, Laurent Gbagbo. This was him right after they took him. This side of his face is bashed in. His wife is a beautiful lady. Her name is Simone Gbagbo. Here is a picture of her. I've known her for over 15 years. A gracious lady. Everyone loves her. And after they took her, the Alassane Ouattara, this is what she looked like after that. You just imagine, use your imagination what happened. They ripped her hair out by the roots, went dancing up and down the streets of Abidjan with the hair, and put the other one up there too. And this is where you have to use your imagination. This is what's going on today because we can't get the State Department to cooperate. There they are, the death squad of the Alassane Ouattara. And there's the First Lady, the beautiful Simone Gbagbo. So lastly, I just hope somebody cares. I hope somebody in the State Department cares enough to intervene and allow that party to go into exile. There's already an operation for that. Almost every president of every African country who has called me is in agreement with what we're trying to do here. With that, I'll yield the floor.
The senator from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment, and I call up amendment number 427.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I
The
yield
clerk
the
will
floor.
report.
Senator from Oregon, Mr. Merkley, proposes an amendment numbered 427.
Madam President, I ask that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Arizona is recognized.
Madam President, call for the regular order on amendment number 436 is modified. I sent a second-degree amendment to the desk.
The senator has a right to call up the regular order.
Senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, proposes an
I
amendment
ask unanimous consent.
number
further reading
441
be
to
dispensed
amendment
with.
Is it
436 as modified.
without objection?
I thank my friend from Illinois for allowing me to do this, and I appreciate it. I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Madam President, I have actually 3 items that I'd like to ask be entered in the record in separate places, and I ask consent that that be allowed.
Without objection.
Madam President, I think most of us involved in public life realize that few people meet us, and many more people meet those who represent us. And that's why, if you're a success as a congressman or a senator or as an elected official, you really have to rely on the people who work for you, who time and again will represent you. Their approach, their sense of caring, their promptness, their courtesy will reflect on you. And if you're lucky, really lucky, you will have some extraordinary people who work for you, who cover you with glory every single day, and even when you don't know it. Now, I started in politics and was lucky to have 2 early mentors. As a college student, the senator who held this seat, Senator Paul Douglas, who inspired me to even take an interest in government. And later, a man he introduced me to, Senator Paul Simon, whom I succeeded in the United States Senate. I spent more time with Paul Simon, and he truly was my mentor, and I inherited many of my good habits from him. But I also inherited something else. I inherited one of his biggest fans and hardest workers who came on my staff. Her name is Betty Hamilton, and she first had her brush with public service in 1984 when she volunteered to work on the Senate campaign of Paul Simon. Paul had a way of bringing out the best in people and bringing the best people into politics. Betty sure fit the bill. In that first campaign, Betty used to pull her two toddlers, Will and Ben, in a little wagon as she walked door to door in her neighborhood, knocking on doors and dropping literature for Paul Simon. She was part of an army of volunteers who helped Paul score an upset victory in a very tough year, politically. 6 years later, when her youngest son started the school, Betty signed on as a volunteer coordinator and office manager for Paul Simon's re-election campaign. After that election, Betty joined my staff, back when I was still in the House of Representatives. She's been with me ever since. Betty works in casework. It sounds simple and routine, but it's not. Most of our work is with senior citizens. If an older person in southern Illinois calls my office because they are having a problem with Social Security or Medicare or some other federal program or agency, Betty most often takes that call. The people she works with often have no place else to turn. They can't afford lawyers. They just need someone who cares and someone who is competent. They have been incorrectly denied Medicare or disability payments or some other benefit they're really entitled to. They've tried, but they can't cut through the bureaucracy to resolve their problem, and many of them are desperate. Some have spent every penny they've ever saved and have nothing left. They're on the verge sometimes of even losing their homes. Betty Hamilton listens to them, and then she gets to work, making phone calls, writing letters, sending emails, trying to make the wheels of government turn the way they should. She's an advocate for fairness and good government. Over the years, Betty's talked with more than 8,000 people in Illinois. They're the lucky ones. She has saved hundreds of people from losing their homes. She's given them hope. I go back on Fridays in Springfield, and I usually have a couple thank yous on my desk. And they always relate to staffers who've done a good job, and usually Betty's name's on them. I can't count the number of people who've written to me to thank me for the work that Betty's done. Many sound like the mother who wrote to me recently and said, "Thank you for helping me. I greatly appreciate it. It's good to be able to pay my bills and take care of my kids." And special thanks to Betty Hamilton. I know that Betty worries some nights about the people she's trying to help. She's come into work many Saturdays to write one more letter or make one more call she thinks might help. Just last week, she helped someone in my state collect $31,000 in disability payments that had been incorrectly denied them. Now, like most people who grew up in St. Louis like Betty, she's a diehard St. Louis Cardinals baseball fan. So she'll know what I mean when I say the highest compliment that I can give her is that I consider Betty Hamilton the Stan Musial of casework. Like Stan the man who played for the Cardinals for 22 years, Betty has worked for me for 2 decades. Like him, she is a modest person, and like Stan Musial, Betty Hamilton has compiled a long and consistent record of success that is likely to remain unbroken for a very long time. Betty didn't take to government initially. She has a master's degree in horticulture. 4 years ago, her husband John, then retired from the state of Illinois, decided they'd buy a farm near Springfield where they could raise some of the best produce, green beans and tomatoes you ever tasted. And you can find Betty and John at the Springfield Farmers Market downtown on Wednesdays and Saturdays. I know I've seen them there the last 2 Saturdays. And I recommend to everybody in Springfield, don't miss their stand. It's the best. That's where I'm going to be able to see Betty from now on. She's retiring from my office, and I'm going to miss her. More importantly, the people who have had her fine service, her fine public service, will miss her too. I hope we can carry on in Betty Hamilton's tradition. We are going to miss her greatly. Madam President, I ask my second statement in the record be made at this point. I ask consent.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, back in the year 2000, my wife Loretta and I went to the Democratic Convention in Los Angeles, and we ran into a young college co-ed from Illinois Wesleyan University in Bloomington, Illinois. She was originally from the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Her name was Sarah Nelson. And Sarah Nelson had a class assignment to cover the convention for a weekly newspaper in Illinois. So she was out there sleeping on the floor of somebody's apartment, wandering around trying to write a story for a weekly newspaper. She was a bright, smiling young woman, and Loretta and I liked her instantly. As fate would have it, we ended up on the same plane flying back to Chicago when the convention had ended. We all landed at Midway late, and as Loretta and I were leaving the baggage section, we saw Sarah Nelson sitting on her bag by the curb. And we said, "Sarah, where are you going?" And she said, "Well, I missed my bus down to Bloomington, Illinois, which is a little over 100 miles away, and I have to wait for one that'll come later tonight." I said, "Well, you're in luck because Loretta and I are driving down there, so come on, get in the car." So she hopped in the car with us, and we drove down to Bloomington. And during the course of that trip, we got to know her even better and like her even more. And she told us how much she loved politics and government, and that she was soon going to graduate from Illinois Wesleyan University. And so I said to her, "Why don't you call me sometime? Maybe you could be an intern in my office." And she agreed to do that. She was not only an intern, she was one of the best. And as a result, as soon as she graduated from college, we hired her. She went to work as a caseworker herself, did a lot of work on immigration and citizenship, and did a great job. And then there was an opportunity for her to work as my deputy director for the entire downstate portion of Illinois. This was in 2006. So Sarah Nelson took off and became my representative, going all over the state and speaking for me at meetings and representing me and working on projects. Projects as important as the new courthouse in Rockford, Illinois, and the new bridge across the Mississippi River near Granite City that connects with downtown St. Louis. There was no project too daunting for Sarah. She took them on. And in the meantime, to no one's surprise, she found the person she wanted to marry. His name is John Freilich. She and John got married several years ago. We went to the wedding, and it was a beautiful event. Her family came down from Minnesota, and the two of them were perfect. John was in medical school, studying to be an orthopedic surgeon. And lo and behold, shortly thereafter, about a year or so, along comes baby Naomi, the baby who was born to John and Sarah. I can't tell you how much she loves that baby, other than to say it has replaced both politics, soccer, and the World Cup in her list of the most important things that she's interested in. I see Sarah out in the park on the weekends, pushing the stroller, sometimes running behind it, with little Naomi just giggling along the way. Well, there's some good news for Minnesota and some bad news for Illinois as this story comes to an end. John Freilich, as I mentioned, is a medical student, and he's going to start his fellowship at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester in just a few weeks. So Sarah and Naomi and John are moving on. I'm going to miss her. She's been a terrific asset on my staff and a terrific person. She's a great mom and been a great ally in the course of the years that she has worked for me. Loretta and I wish Sarah and John and Naomi the very best and thank them for the wonderful years of service that they've given to me and to the state of Illinois. Madam President, the last statement I'd like to make relates to a piece of, I ask consent that it be placed separate part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, 10 years ago, I embarked on a legislative mission to pass a bill called the DREAM Act. And the purpose of the DREAM Act was to give to young people who came to this country as children and who were raised in the United States, who have graduated high school, done a good, made a good life here in this country, to give them a chance to become legal in the United States of America. They are long-term U.S. residents. They have good moral character. They graduated high school. And we say if you'll complete at least 2 years of college and military service in good standing, we'll give you a chance to become legal. Now, there are thousands of young people who fit this description in the United States. They were brought here as kids. If their parents came to the United States and overstayed a visa or crossed the border when they shouldn't have, these children shouldn't be held accountable. They were children. We don't hold children accountable for any wrongdoing by their parents. They grew up here. They pledge allegiance to the flag in the classrooms here. They sing our national anthem, and many of them speak no other language than English. The premise of the DREAM Act is that we should not punish the children for their parents' actions. That's not the American way. Instead, the DREAM Act says to these students, America is going to give you a chance. a chance to continue to live here and to make this an even better nation. The DREAM Act is not just the right thing to do. It makes America a better country. The young people who would qualify for the DREAM Act are class valedictorians, star athletes, honor roll students, and ROTC leaders. They are the future doctors, soldiers, computer scientists, and engineers who will make this country even better. The DREAM Act would strengthen our national security by giving thousands of highly qualified, well-educated young people the chance to enlist in the armed forces. The DREAM Act has the support of not only Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, but also General Colin Powell. And it will help our economy by giving these talented young people the chance to become engineers and entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, teachers, small business owners, and nurses. That's why the DREAM Act has the support of business leaders from across the political spectrum, Rupert Murdoch and the CEOs of companies like Microsoft and Pfizer. The talented young people who would be eligible for the DREAM Act call themselves dreamers. When I first embarked on this mission 10 years ago, they used to kind of hold back in the shadows after a meeting and kind of whisper to me as I went by that they would be saved if the DREAM Act is passed. Well, they're stepping forward now, and I'm glad they are, so America can see who they are and what they would bring to this nation. Every day, these dreamers contact my office to tell me their stories. These stories energize me to keep up the fight. The last time we had a vote on this in the Senate floor was last December, and we had a majority, but it takes 60 here, and when it comes to controversial issues, I want to revisit that issue and give these young people a chance. Let me tell you the story of two of these DREAM Act eligible people. Herta Lusho was brought to the United States from Albania when she was 11. She and her mother settled in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. Herta came here legally, but shortly after arriving, Herta's mother filed an application to stay in the United States. Herta quickly learned English and became an academic star. She graduated from Grosse Pointe South High School with a 4.05 grade point average. In high school, she was a member of the varsity track team, won an Advanced Placement Scholar Award, and was a member of the National Honor Society. Here she is at graduation. Herta is currently a junior at the University of Detroit Mercy, where she is an honors student, studying to be an electrical engineer. She has a grade point average of 3.98 and has completed 2 internships at engineering firms. She's also very involved in the community, volunteering in homeless shelters, tutoring programs in her church. This is what one of her friends says about Herta. I'm humbled by Herta's willingness and desire to serve. I've had the privilege of going to the same church at which she faithfully serves. She spends hours tutoring kids and volunteering with junior high Sunday school class. It's a joy to watch so many children run up to her church because of the love they received when they were with her. In 2009, after 9 years of legal proceedings, the government placed Herta and her mother in deportation proceedings. Here's what Herta said about being placed in deportation. I was shocked, she said. My friends are here. My education is here. My community's here. All of a sudden, I was asked to leave behind everything I know, and go back to a country I barely know. When I lived there, I was little, so I don't remember it much, and I barely speak the Albanian language anymore. Herta's community rose to her defense. Thousands of people signed an online petition to stop her deportation. Last year, the Department of Homeland Security granted Herta a 1-year stay, just 1 year. The department is now considering whether to delay it for another year. I sincerely hope they will. Would it be a good use of taxpayers' dollars to deport Herta? Of course not. There is so much discussion in America today about what we need from our young people for America to succeed in the future, in the so-called STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. Every year, we issue thousands of H-1B visas to bring foreign workers to the United States in the STEM fields. Now, Herta is a straight-A student in electrical engineering, a STEM field. She doesn't need an H-1B visa. She is a homegrown American talent. Why in the world would we create a law to allow someone who has never lived in the United States to come here and legally reside, to become an electrical engineer, and tell Herta, who's lived here all of the life that she remembers, that she has to leave? That is just plain wrong. Herta came to Capitol Hill to speak at a briefing I sponsored for the DREAM Act. This is what she said. I'm a typical story. There are thousands of stories out there just like mine. Please support the DREAM Act so students like me don't have to leave. We are worth it. This is a country we've come to love. Herta's right. She and thousands of others are worth it. They have so much to contribute to America if we just give them a chance. Now let me introduce you to one other student. This is Julietta Garibay. Julietta was brought to the United States in 1992 at the age of 11. She graduated from the University of Texas with a bachelor's degree in nursing. She was on the Dean's List and the President's Honor Roll and volunteered more than 500 hours at hospitals in Dallas and Austin. Julietta went on to earn a master's degree at the University of Texas in public health nursing. She's a member of Sigma Theta Tau, the International Honor Society of Nursing. Julietta has been a registered nurse since 2004. Here's the problem. Julietta is undocumented. She cannot legally work in the United States of America. Let me tell you something else about Julietta. She's married to Staff Sergeant Armin Weinrich, who serves in the U.S. Air Force Reserves. Here's a picture of Julietta and Staff Sergeant Weinrich at Julietta's graduation. Staff Sergeant Weinrich is currently awaiting deployment. He will go overseas to defend our country, but while he's gone serving America, his wife could be deported. That's just plain wrong. Julietta sent me a letter. Here's what she said about her dreams for the future. I desperately need the DREAM Act to pass so I can practice my beloved profession of nursing. I've been dreaming of being a nurse for the past 7 years since I earned my nursing license. Once the DREAM Act passes, I'll join the military in hopes of making up the lost time and serve the country I call home as a nurse. Do we need more nurses in America? Of course we do. In fact, the United States imports thousands of foreign-trained nurses each year to meet the needs of our country. What's wrong with this picture? This young lady has a master's degree in nursing from the University of Texas. And I'm sure my colleague on the floor would acknowledge one of the most highly regarded universities in America. She has this master's degree, and they're planning to deport her. If they do, she'll probably cross paths in the airport with a nurse coming here on a work visa from some foreign country to work in our hospital. That isn't fair, it isn't smart, it just doesn't make sense. The DREAM Act would give Julietta a chance to serve the America she loves, the America she calls home. I first introduced the DREAM Act in 2001. Since then, I've met so many immigrant students who would qualify, like Herda Lucio and Julietta Garibay. They are Americans in their hearts. They are willing to serve our country. They are willing to make it a better place. We have to give them a chance. I ask my colleagues, please, in your heart of hearts, think about the fairness and justice behind this legislation. Let's support and pass the DREAM Act. It's the right thing to do, and it'll make America a stronger nation. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. And I ask unanimous consent that following my remarks, the senator from Texas, Senator Cornyn, be recognized.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor today to talk about our obligation to protect workers across America and to urge my colleagues to support the Protecting America's Workers Act, which I'm very proud to introduce today. Madam President, middle-class families across this country are really struggling. So many of them have lost their homes or their jobs and are fighting to keep their heads above water. We are working hard here to create jobs and get the economy back on track, but we also owe it to middle-class families to make sure that those jobs are safe and healthy. Madam President, in 2009 alone, there were 4,340 deaths in workplaces across America, and over 3 million more were injured or sickened while on the job. You know, if more than 4,000 Americans were killed in one day, it would be on the front page of every newspaper in this country. If an epidemic in this country claimed 4,000 lives, it would lead the nightly news each week. But that's not the way it works with workplace injuries. They happen a few at a time, spread out across the country. In communities like Anacortes in my home state of Washington, where a fire broke out last year at the Tesoro refinery and killed 7 workers. These were men and women who were taken too young, with so much life to live and with so many people to live it with. Workers who took on tough jobs and worked long hours during difficult economic times to provide for their families. They were people who made tremendous sacrifices and who really embodied so much of what is good about their community and their state, and they have been dearly missed. Washington State investigators looked into that incident, and they determined that that tragedy could have been and should have been prevented. The problems that led to what happened were known beforehand. They should have been fixed, and they weren't. And that is heartbreaking. Every worker in every industry deserves to be confident that while they are working hard and doing their jobs, their employers are doing everything they can to protect them. And that, Madam President, is why I'm proud to reintroduce the Protecting America's Workers Act. This legislation is a long overdue update to the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, or the OSH Act. Since that groundbreaking law was passed over 40 years ago, we know American industry has changed significantly. Businesses and workplaces have become much more complex. Workers are performing 21st century tasks, but the government is still using a 1970 approach to regulations to protect employees. It doesn't make sense. It needs to change. We need to update the way we as a country think about our worker safety regulations, and this law is a very important step in that direction. This is not about adding more regulations. It's about having smarter regulations. It's about having regulations that protect workers and make sense for business. Madam President, the Protecting America's Workers Act makes a number of key improvements to the OSH Act, but I want to highlight just a few. First of all, it increases protections for workers who blow the whistle on unsafe working conditions. You know, protecting workers who tell the truth is just common sense. In fact, in other modern laws like the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act or the Food Safety Modernization Act, they do exactly that. But since the OSH Act has not been updated, the vast majority of workers today don't have similar protections. An important part of my bill would make sure that a whistleblower's right to protection from retaliation cannot be waived through collective bargaining agreements. And they have the option to appeal to the federal courts if they feel that they're being mistreated for telling the truth about dangerous practices. The Protecting America's Worker Act also improves reporting, inspection, and other enforcement of workplace health and safety violations. Expands the rights of the victims, and it makes sure that employers who oversee unsafe workplaces are pushed to quickly improve them to avoid further endangering worker health and safety. This is a good bill. I'm proud to have a number of co-sponsors here in the Senate, as well as the support of many prominent national groups in our efforts to improve workplace safety. You know, nothing can bring back the workers we lost in communities like Anacortes, but we certainly owe it to them to make sure that workers everywhere are truly protected on the job. So I urge my colleagues to support the Protecting America's Workers Act and to keep working with us to make workplaces safer and healthier across America. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Texas is recognized.
Madam President, I want to speak briefly today about Medicare and about the law, and specifically a law that Congress passed in 2003, which provided for something called the Medicare trigger. This was when the Medicare trustees would indicate that a Medicare funding warning should issue according to that law. Then the President of the United States, under that law, must within 15 days submit to Congress proposed legislation to respond to that warning. So what does all of this mean? Well, we know that the Medicare trustees made the situation clear that Medicare will run out of money by the year 2024. Medicare's unfunded liabilities are more than $24 trillion and growing. In other words, there's a $24 trillion gap between the promises that the U.S. government has made to seniors and the funding to pay for it. And of course, as the chief actuary stated, this is actually an optimistic scenario that we can fund Medicare through 2024. Madam President, the President of the United States has failed to comply with this law duly passed by Congress and signed into law. And I don't really know why the President has failed to meet this legal responsibility of the law. I hope it's an oversight. I hope it's one that he will correct shortly. But having no plan while the President has criticized the House for the plan that they have passed is bad enough. But failing to submit a plan when the President of the United States is required to do so by law is a violation of the law, something the President has taken an oath to uphold. And there's no doubt about it, in Section 802, entitled Presidential Submission of Legislation, it uses the word shall. It's not may, it's not can, it's not it would be a good idea. It says the President shall submit to Congress within a 15-day period, beginning on the date the budget submission to Congress is made, submit proposed legislation responding to this Medicare funding warning. March 1st marked the 15th day since the President submitted his budget, and the Medicare trustees, as you know, as we all know, have been ringing the alarm bell for years. But unfortunately, this is not the only provision of the law that the President has neglected. We could talk about the Greek debt crisis. On Tuesday, the President talked about the Greek debt crisis to the in a joint press conference with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. This is what the President said about the Greek debt crisis. He said, "We pledge to cooperate fully in working through these issues, both on a bilateral basis, but also through international and financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund." Obviously, Greece has suffered a debt crisis. They have the International Monetary Fund funded by various nations to bail them out. Unfortunately, when the United States has a debt crisis, if we do nothing about it, there will be no one left to bail us out. But the problem with the President's statement about the International Monetary Fund is that Congress has also spoken on that issue. Senator Vitter and I sponsored an amendment last summer that was incorporated into the so-called Dodd-Frank Act, or the Financial Services Regulatory Reform Bill. This amendment was approved unanimously by the Senate and became law by the President's hand. This provision, included in Section 1501 of Dodd-Frank, requires the Treasury Secretary to determine whether or not IMF loans to countries that are already deeply in debt will likely be repaid, and certify that determination to Congress. Furthermore, if an IMF loan will not be repaid, the Treasury Secretary is required to direct the Executive Director to vote in opposition to the proposed loan. These provisions became federal law for a reason, because we sought to protect U.S. taxpayers from being used by the IMF to bail out foreign nations that have been making irresponsible spending decisions. So, Madam President, as I said earlier, I hope the President's failure to comply with this mandatory requirement under the Medicare law we passed in 2003, that this is simply an oversight. But we know that so far the President and the majority party in the Senate has not submitted, the President has actually submitted a budget which doubles the debt in 5 years, triples it in 10 years, but he has made no response to the Medicare trustee's statement that Medicare will be insolvent in 13 years. Instead, he's attacked the only people that have been responsible enough to come up with a proposal. Admittedly, the proposal may not be perfect, but it is a responsibility of all of us to do what we can to try to solve problems, not just attack people and use for a political advantage when other people try to step up and meet their obligations. So the issue is respect for the law, and the issue is whether the checks and balances in our Constitution are still in place. And the question is whether the President somehow considers himself above the law, or whether the law applies to him just like it does to each one of us. I hope, Madam President, if this is an oversight, I hope the President will remedy that oversight, and he will submit proposed legislation to deal with this impending insolvency of Medicare forthwith. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka?